Hey guys, tonight we're stepping into a kitchen where the knives are sharp, but not just for chopping onions. You're not a noble. You're not a merchant. You're something far more cursed. The cook for the local hangman in 17th century France. And you probably won't survive this. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You wake up before dawn, not because you're an overachiever or have some rustic ambition about the smell of bread baking. No, you wake up early because you need to prepare breakfast for a man who tightens nooses for a living. And frankly, you'd rather he not be hungry. The mattress underneath you. It's not much more than a pile of straw in a corner, slightly less moldy than the other corners. Your blanket smells like smoke and regret. You rub your eyes, swing your legs over the edge, and immediately step on a rat. It's fine. You're used to it. The air smells like ash, salted meat, and the lingering scent of iron. Not like fresh ironed linen, more like bleeding iron, because your window looks out on the edge of the execution yard. Yes, that one. The one where birds gather unnaturally fast when they sense breakfast. And you're supposed to make breakfast in this atmosphere for someone who ends lives for a living and likes a nice yolky egg while doing it. The fire is nearly dead in the hearth. You banked it with ash last night, like your mother taught you, like her mother taught her. But even ash has given up trying to warm this cursed little cottage. You blow gently. A spark catches. There's a chance you won't have to cook in the dark. Small blessings. You shuffle to the pantry. Calling it a pantry is generous. It's a shelf with some bread that's as hard as the local priest's moral compass, a few onions that look like they've seen some things, and a chunk of cheese that may or may not be housing a tiny civilization. The hangman likes eggs in the morning, but you only have two left, and one's cracked. You sniff it. Smells like sulfur and despair. Perfect. You slice some of the bread and start frying it in animal fat. Because butter, real butter, is for people whose jobs don't require them to carry a rope. The sizzle is oddly comforting. So is the absence of screaming. That's not always guaranteed here. You crack the better of the two eggs into a pan. The yolk holds. Thank heaven. The second egg, you debate. You know it's bad, but wasting food is a luxury reserved for people who can walk through town without being spat on. You pour it in anyway. The hiss is immediate, the smell aggressive. You add more onions to mask it. Onions are the medieval Fabrizi. You finish plating. Bread, egg, a smear of mustard, a few apple slices from last week that have turned the color of old copper coins. It'll do. The hangman isn't picky about presentation. He's picky about timing. He enters with the kind of silence that makes your skin crawl. Tall. Thick wrists. Face like a baked potato left too long in the fire. He nods. You place the plate before him and retreat. You watch from the corner as he eats. Slowly. Methodically. Like he's judging the food. And you, and maybe also the state of your eternal soul. You always forget how quietly he chews. He doesn't thank you. He never does. Just finishes, wipes his mouth with his sleeve, and walks out the door with the same ease a priest might carry a hymnal. Only his book has names, and those names don't make it to church. You sit back down. The room feels emptier after he leaves, but not safer. His presence lingers like smoke, or judgment, or that half egg you know is going to turn on you by lunch. Historians still argue whether hangmen in early modern France were feared or simply avoided. But cooks like you're not even acknowledged. You're invisible. Unless the meal's late, then you become very visible, very fast. You pour yourself a cup of thin beer, not the good stuff. Yours is barely fermented, mostly barley flavored water, but it cuts the taste of failure and unwashed frying pans. The bread from his plate, he left a crust. You break it apart, chew slowly. It tastes like everything you hate about your life, but it's still better than nothing. Outside, you hear the crowd assembling. You don't need to look. You know today's a double hanging. You can always tell from the way the dogs howl. It's like they sense it. The tension in the air, the faint smell of gallows grease, and powdery anticipation. You finish your crust. You rinse the pans in a basin of water that hasn't been changed since Louis XIII had hair. The bits of yolk cling to your fingers, sticky and stubborn. Then you sit back down. You have an hour before you have to clean the blood from his boots. You'll scrub them with vinegar and prayer and hope it's just mud this time. So, yes, the day begins with breakfast, not just for the hangman, but for you too. Only your meal isn't food, it's fear and eggs, and the knowledge that tomorrow you'll have to do it all again if you're lucky. You head out to the market with your basket hanging from one arm and your face angled downward, like the cobblestones have suddenly become fascinating. You've learned over time to walk like you're trying to disappear, because in a way, you are. The town knows what you do. Not the full truth, of course. You don't swing the blade, you don't tie the rope, you don't haul the condemned up the scaffold, but you feed the man who does. And in 17th century France, that's enough to stain your reputation darker than a chimney sweep's sleeves. It's market day. That should be a cheerful thing. There are carts brimming with bruised apples, bundles of herbs tied with twine, wheels of cheese sweating in the morning sun. But when you approach, it's as if a shadow passes over the stalls. Conversations soften. A fishmonger stops slicing mid-motion. The baker pretends to inspect his own bread very intensely, as though it might whisper state secrets. You step up to a vegetable stand. The vendor's eyes dart around, then settle on a turnip. He doesn't look at you as he says, "Nothing left today." You both know that's not true. There are at least 3 dozen carrots stacked in artful pyramids, and you'd bet your other shoe he has potatoes hidden behind the sack of flour. But you just nod. You've learned not to argue. You shuffle on. Historians still argue whether these hangmen and their households were legally ostracized or just culturally repellent. Either way, the result is the same. Your money doesn't stretch very far, not because it lacks value, but because no one wants it on their counter. You finally find someone desperate enough. An old woman selling wilted greens and half a cabbage that looks like it's seen battle. She meets your eyes for a moment, then looks away fast. 2 sous, she mutters. It's 3 times what it's worth, but you hand over the coins without complaint. Your coins leave your fingers reluctantly, and hers accept them like she's plucking frogs from a bucket. She wraps your cabbage in paper that already smells of vinegar and sadness, then pushes it across the stall. At the bread stall, things get worse. The baker is a round, ruddy man with arms like tree trunks and a nose that has its own gravitational pull. He spots you and immediately busies himself stacking loaves, then unstacking them. You wait. He doesn't look up. Finally, you clear your throat and say, as gently as you can, just one loaf. Yesterday's, if you have it. He replies without turning, all gone. Which is a lie so bold, the stack of rye loaves behind him flinches in embarrassment. You try again. Even crusts? He grunts. Then, slowly, he pulls out a misshapen loaf from beneath the counter. It looks like someone sat on it during a thunderstorm. Here, take it. No charge. You know better than to accept it for free. I'll pay. No, he says too fast. Just take it. And don't tell anyone you got it from me. You nod. You feel smaller than usual, which is impressive, considering you already hunch like a dog that's been kicked too many times. You tuck the bread into your basket. It's warm at least. Probably the only warm thing you'll carry today. The irony is not lost on you. You cook for a man paid by the crown, but you shop like an outcast. You feed someone who holds life and death in his calloused hands. Yet you can't buy onions without a discount. In shame. As you pass the fishmonger, he spits. Not at you, just in your direction. Like the street offended him, and you happen to be standing there. You walk faster. You take a shortcut home, through the alley where the tanner's dogs used to bark. One of them follows you for a bit, sniffing at your hem. You'd pet it if you weren't worried it might be the most affection you get all day. By the time you return to your kitchen, the bread is cold and the cabbage has started to leak some kind of juice you don't want to think too hard about. You set the basket down and lean against the wall. You've been gone 40 minutes, but it feels like you've aged a decade. You check the hearth, still holding heat, though just barely. You feed it more wood, watching the flames catch with the same weary awe as someone watching a miracle they don't quite believe in. Your stomach grumbles. You tear a piece from the lopsided loaf and chew. It tastes like flour, ash, and something else. Bitterness, maybe. Outside, the church bells toll once. Then again. Noon is close. You've got just enough time to start chopping for lunch. You're not sure what he'll want. Sometimes he's talkative after a hanging. Other times, he just sits and stares at the wall, like it owes him something. You reach for the cabbage. It squeaks when you cut into it. Not a good sign. Still, you'll make a soup. Cabbage, onion, maybe some dried peas. Not because it'll taste good, but because it's hot. And hot counts. For more than flavor in a house that shares a backyard with the gallows. As you drop slices into the pot, the broth begins to bubble. You stir slowly, lost in thought. Then you hear the gate creak open. He's home. You wipe your hands on your apron and brace yourself. He always comes through the kitchen first. Always. And today, he smells of rope, smoke, and something metallic. He doesn't say a word, just sits at the table and waits. You ladle out the soup, place it in front of him. He looks down at it, then at you. It needs salt, he says. Then he begins to eat. You return to your corner, pick up your crust of bread, and chew quietly. Salt. Yes. You'll remember that next time. The market was bad, but the kitchen is worse. Not because it's messy. It's not, at least not by 17th century standards, where clean just means nothing is actively on fire. No, it's worse because of its location. The back wall is shared with the execution yard, and the walls, bless their uneven planks and generous gaps, are about as soundproof as wet parchment. So as you prepare dinner, you hear things. Voices, mostly. Sometimes sobbing. Once, a man sang. Badly. The lyrics were slurred but unmistakable, a lullaby his mother used to sing according to the Hangman. You remember because that night he didn't eat much, just bread and a glass of wine, and a long silence where the clinking spoon would have gone. Tonight, you're making stew, which sounds simple until you realize you're working with a cut of meat that might be squirrel, might be rat, and might, on a particularly unlucky day, be reclaimed from the execution site. There are laws against that, of course, but there are laws against a lot of things, like bribery and nepotism and bleeding someone out in public while charging admission. You slice carrots. They're soft already, not because they're cooked, just old. Everything in this house is old. The knives, the wood, your hope. Behind the wall, you hear boots. Not many. Probably a small crowd today. That means it's either raining or they're executing someone people liked. You try not to listen. You really do. But the voices carry, especially the high ones, the ones that don't understand why. You toss the meat into the pot. It sizzles. You pretend it smells like dinner. The hangman's footsteps come next. You've learned to tell them apart from others. His are slow, rhythmic, deliberate, like he's thinking with every step. Sometimes you wonder if he's praying, but then you remember, he's not the praying kind. You hear the click of the gate, then the groan of the yard door swinging shut, and just like that, it's quiet. Historians still argue whether hangmen enjoyed their work or simply endured it, whether they saw themselves as moral agents of justice or as men cornered by the only job no one else would do. You don't know the answer, but you know how he eats afterward, and that tells you plenty. You add turnips to the stew. They soften quickly. Good. The fewer textures, the less anyone notices what's in the bowl. Sometimes the wall gets warm, not in a comforting way, more in a freshly used scaffold kind of way. You once saw steam rise from the baseboards. That night, you served cold food. As you stir, you glance at the corner shelf. A bowl of salt, 3 cloves of garlic, a small wooden charm shaped like a foot. Protection, supposedly. From what? No one ever quite says. You hear a creak on the stair. Not him yet. Just the house settling, maybe. Or the ghosts. The stew bubbles. You ladle it into 2 chipped bowls and set the table. No tablecloth, of course. That went out the window the day a prisoner escaped and bled all over it. The door opens. He walks in. He nods. That's all. He sits, eats. You join him with your bowl and your silence. Halfway through, he speaks. Town priest asks for another duck. You blink. A duck? For Sunday dinner. You nod. He doesn't say it, but you know what it means. The priest won't speak to you, won't look you in the eye, but he'll eat your duck stew if it comes through someone else's hands. Hypocrisy tastes best with time, apparently. You sip your broth. It's too hot. Or maybe you're just flushed. He continues between mouthfuls. Woman cried today. Said she was innocent. You glance up. Was she? He shrugs. They all say that. You don't press. You've learned. Questions lead to stories, and stories lead to dreams you'd rather not have. He finishes his bowl, pushes it aside, and wipes his mouth on his sleeve. Then he looks at you. Not through you. At you. You put garlic in this. You nod. He grunts. Good. Keeps the sickness off. By which he means plague. It's been edging toward town for weeks now, like a shadow that hasn't decided which window to slip through. You nod again. I'll fetch more tomorrow. He stands. You expect him to leave. Instead, he lingers. You hear the boy scream. You freeze. The spoon hovers midair. He shrugs. First time it got to me. Been a while. You say nothing. He nods like that's enough and leaves. You stare at your bowl. The garlic floats like tiny lifeboats. You eat slowly. When you finish, you clean up. quietly. The knives go back in their notch. The bowl of salt is topped off. You sweep the floor, even though the dust comes back in under the door as fast as you sweep it out. You pause by the wall. Press your hand to the wood. It's cool now. Later, when you lie in bed, you'll hear the birds again. They circle late at night sometimes, especially after a double execution, as if they're waiting for leftovers. You'll dream of turnips and ropes and voices on the other side of the wall, and in the morning, you'll do it all again. You learn early on that the hangman has preferences, not just about what time he eats. Early, always early, but how? The eggs must be runny, the bread crust must be thick. And stew? He likes it red. Not tomato red, those are exotic and expensive, but blood red, the kind you get when you scrape the pot bottom and let things cook a little too long. Just on the edge of burning, just like him. Today, he wants meat again. Of course he does. You've managed to trade half a wheel of aged cheese and 2 nails for something that vaguely resembles a leg of lamb. The butcher didn't ask questions. You didn't offer answers. You bring it home wrapped in brown paper and soaked in suspicion. You wash it, or try to. The water's cold, the basin's smaller than the cut, and your hands are still stained from yesterday's carrots. You mutter under your breath. Not curses, just nonsense. It's what keeps your mind distracted from the smell, from the sound of the gallows being oiled in the yard. The creak of the rope being tested is more regular than the church bell, and it always happens just before lunch. You begin seasoning, coarse salt, rosemary, and a pinch of mustard seed you've been hoarding since spring. You rub it in like penance. The meat sizzles as it hits the pan, and the smell is, well, not pleasant, but strong. That's the point. Strong smells cover up others, like the stench of blood that clings to his boots, or the way the floorboards in the hallway still stick from last week's accident. Historians still argue whether executioners were legally required to live on the outskirts of town or whether it was simply the social norm. Either way, you're here, outside the gate, past the chapel, beyond even the tanner. You live where the roads get muddy and the air gets suspicious, which means no surprise guests, no visitors, except once. She came 3 months ago. A young woman said she was the hangman's cousin. You recognized the lie immediately. She was too clean. Her shoes were new. Her hair was combed. Her accent held polish. But he let her in, let her sit at his table. You served her wine you'd been saving for winter. She left with a package wrapped in linen. You don't know what it was, but that night, he ate twice. You still think about her. Her soft voice, the way she looked at the stew, then at you, like she knew, like she understood what it meant to cook for the kind of man who measures out pain by the rope length. Your stew finishes. You ladle it out into a large wooden bowl, wipe the edges with the cleanest part of your apron, and set it on the table just as he walks in. He grunts in appreciation. That's the closest thing to a compliment he gives. He sits, digs in. You retreat again, as always, to your corner, to your slice of bread, and your cup of weak cider that tastes vaguely of apples and mostly of fermentation gone wrong. You used rosemary, he says mid-bite. You nod. It masks the good, he interrupts. You almost smile. Almost. Halfway through the meal, he stops chewing. He stares at his bowl like it's about to speak. You ever think about what it's like? He asks. You blink. What's like? Being up there, knowing you've got 5 seconds left. You hesitate. No. Me neither, he lies. You both sit in silence. The wind outside stirs the shutters. Somewhere in the yard, something metal clangs softly. Probably the trapdoor latch. He finishes, pushes the bowl away. Good. Then he gets up and walks to the door. Pauses. More tomorrow. You nod again. That's the whole conversation. After he leaves, you clean the bowl. The grease clings. You scrub harder. Later, you check the back room. His boots are there, caked in something dry and brown. His coat hangs heavy on the peg. You don't touch it. Not since the time you found a tooth in the pocket. You go back to the kitchen. You sweep. You wipe. You sit. You breathe. And then you begin to prepare for breakfast, because he always wants eggs, and he likes them runny. There's a moment each morning, right after the fire is coaxed back to life, but before the eggs hit the pan, when you forget what wall your kitchen shares. It never lasts long, because the yard wakes up early, and unlike normal backyards, filled with dew and birdsong, this one moans. Wood shifts, ropes creak, and sometimes, the worst of all, silence hums louder than any sound. You try to focus on the eggs. Not that they're particularly cooperative. One of them cracks sideways, spilling yolk into the ashes. You curse under your breath, then remember to cross yourself. Superstition runs deep when your workplace includes gallows. The kitchen table is no ordinary table either. It tilts slightly, thanks to a leg chewed by rats during the famine 3 years back. You've wedged a piece of broken crockery under it, but it still groans under the weight of breakfast and judgment. The stove's heat never reaches the far corners of the room. Those stay cold, like memory. You don't light candles there anymore. They always flicker strangely. Once, one even snuffed itself out, though there was no draft. You fry what's left of the eggs, add yesterday's bread with a hint of oil, and sprinkle it with parsley you stole from the priest's courtyard. He doesn't deserve it. You do. Just as you finish, the back wall thumps. Not hard, just a knock. Deliberate, faint. You freeze. It's not the hangman. He comes through the front. Always. You wait. Nothing. You carry the plate to the table. He enters a moment later, sniffing the air like an animal that's forgotten it's human. Parsley, he mutters. You nod. Fresh. He eats in silence. You do too, though your stomach barely listens. The knock still sits with you, in your ears, your hands. After he finishes, he leaves as he always does. No word, no look. You let the silence settle. You hope the wall won't speak again. It does. A whisper, maybe. Or wind. But there's no wind today. You walk over. Press your ear gently to the wooden panel. Nothing. You step back. Pour water over the coals. Breakfast is done. Historians still argue whether executioners ever had accomplices, those who helped in private, not with rope or blade, but in more subtle ways. Feeding, cleaning, cooking. You wonder what they'd say about you. Not that it matters. The wall doesn't care about scholars. You scrub the plates, hands raw from soap that smells like tallow and ashes. A mix you know too well. Your kitchen has no window looking out into the yard, just that wall. And on days like this, it feels less like a wall and more like skin. Sometimes you swear it breathes. You tried to paint it once. A soft ochre made from crushed herbs and chalk. It peeled within the week. Nothing adheres to gallows wood. Yes, gallows wood, because this cottage, long ago, was part of the old structure, before they built the new scaffold, before they moved the main stage to the square. The timbers were recycled, efficient, practical, haunted. You move back to the hearth and begin boiling water for midday tea. Chamomile, if you can still call it that. dried flowers and twigs you've scraped from the hedge. It'll calm your nerves, or at least give you something warm to sip while pretending you're somewhere else. The wall groans again, not a knock this time, a settling, like it remembers. You clench your jaw. This is your life. You, a cook, the kind who can gut a fish with one hand and swallow fear with the other. You taste the tea, bitter but steady. A fly buzzes near the ceiling. It dances lazily. It never lands on that wall. You sip more. Think of the others who lived here before you, cooks probably, or widows, or those with debts too steep to stay in town. You've heard stories, people who moved in and left within weeks, claimed the floorboards whispered names, that the kitchen knives rearranged themselves. You know better. The knives stay where you put them. Mostly, you hear the yard gate open. The hangman's back already? No, too soon. You peer through the crack in the shutters. It's the clerk. The one with a limp and a quill always tucked behind his ear. He never comes here. He's speaking with the hangman. You can't hear the words, but the tone is low, businesslike, and short. The clerk leaves as fast as he arrives. Inside you pace. Your stew pot sits empty. The bread bin is low. The salt barrel is due for refilling. These are the things you control. Ingredients, heat, timing. You do not control the wall, or the visitors, or the ghosts. You hear the floor creak upstairs, the hangman's home, or maybe he never left. You go to prepare lunch. The knock hasn't come again, but you hear it in your memory. It's always louder there. You don't open the pantry with hope. Hope's a fragile thing, and this pantry has chewed through it long ago. What's left is a shelf of jars, some with contents unidentifiable even under good candlelight, and a basket of onions trying to become compost before your eyes. You sniff the air. No plague rot. That's always a win. You pull out a slab of cured meat. You don't ask what animal it came from. You stopped asking months ago, sometime after the lamb had cloven hooves and the rabbit had teeth too human. Still, protein is protein. You scrape off the green fuzz. It'll be boiled anyway. The stew today is part meat, part guesswork. You add in a stale turnip, some dried greens, and a handful of barley that's seen better seasons. The broth goes murky fast. That's good. Murky hides things, including guilt. Your knife clinks against the wooden cutting board, worn smooth from years of reluctant service. You've sharpened that blade so many times it's thinner than your patience. Behind you, a faint clatter. You spin. It's only the garlic braid falling off the wall. Again, you hang it back up, tying it tighter this time. Not for flavor. At this point, the garlic is decorative, but for protection. The kind that wards off whatever the church refuses to acknowledge. The stew simmers. You stir it clockwise 3 times. Not superstition, habit, maybe both. Historians still argue whether executioners were given spoiled food on purpose as a form of passive punishment from local suppliers. But in your case, it's not a theory. It's dinner. The butcher, when he's feeling generous, lets you have bones too splintered for his dogs. The baker once sold you day-old bread, so stale you had to soak it 3 hours just to dent it with your teeth. And the fishmonger? He won't even sell to you anymore. Said his eels stopped wriggling when you came near. So you take what's left, you scrape, you scavenge, you boil things twice, you salt until they pretend to be edible. Sometimes it works. Other times, the hangman eats in silence, then licks the spoon and says, "Tastes like guilt." You never know if that's a compliment. Today's stew bubbles angrily, like it resents being made. You taste a spoonful. It's hot, salty, rough on the tongue. You serve it anyway. He comes in 15 minutes later, hands black with something you don't ask about. He sniffs. Meat? You nod. Mostly. He doesn't smile. He never does. But he sits, eats. You sit across from him. You don't speak. Words only invite questions. And you've learned that most answers taste worse than this soup. He finishes, wipes his mouth. More salt. Always more salt. You nod. You'll add it next time. Or maybe you won't. He never notices. Not really. After he leaves, you clean the bowl. Carefully. Ritualistically. Not for sanitation, but because dried stew is surprisingly hard to chip off. And you only have one bowl that's not cracked down the middle. You store the leftover stew, what little remains, in a jar tucked behind the flour sack. A rat got into the flour last week. You haven't had the energy to trap it. It's not the worst thing you've shared a kitchen with. You wipe down the counters with a cloth that was once white and now just pretends. You hum to yourself the same tune your mother used to sing while cooking. Something about angels and loaves of bread. No angels visit this house. As night creeps in, you light the oil lamp. Its flame flickers more than usual. You tighten the wick. Still flickering. The wall stays quiet tonight. That's worse somehow. You check the pantry again. There's a small jar of lard, a single apple, and a root you're hoping is parsnip and not something decorative. You make a list in your mind: onions, salt, vinegar, prayers. Outside, you hear a dog howl. Then another joins in. Something's moving through the yard. You don't look. Instead, you add more wood to the fire and sit by the hearth, watching shadows stretch across the floor like fingers. You remember when you used to dream of being a tavern cook, a loud, bustling kitchen, laughter, music, flirting in the pantry with the brewer's apprentice. Now, the only flirting is between mildew and regret. You peel the apple. It's mealy. You eat it anyway. A knock at the front door. Your heart stutters. No one knocks here. You stand. Slowly. Wipe your hands on your apron. Open the door. It's a boy. Dirty. Barefoot. Holding a scrap of parchment. You take it. He runs. The parchment says only, tomorrow. 2 guests. You fold it. Place it in the empty bread tin. You know what it means. 2 condemned, 2 last meals. You'll need to prepare something special. Something memorable. You sit back down, stir the dying embers of the fire, and start thinking about a recipe that tastes like mercy. You wake before dawn again. But today you don't stretch. You don't mutter your usual half-hearted prayer to Saint Lawrence, patron of cooks and, ironically, grilled martyrs. You just sit there, on your straw mattress, holding the memory of that parchment in your hands, even though it's tucked away in the tin. 2 guests, condemned, which means you are now the chef of someone's final memory. No pressure. You rise. Your joints crack. It's cold enough that the heart's breath has vanished, so you do the fire dance. Poke, blow, curse, repeat. When the flames catch, it's like watching a reluctant sunrise flicker inside a prison. You glance at the pantry, still nearly empty, still unapologetic. You'll need something better than murky broth and a prayer for today. You think, you pace. You whisper the plan aloud like it's a recipe. Eggs if I can steal them, duck if I can beg it, and cider if the priest's cellar door sticks open again. You dress and leave. The village is quiet. The only others awake this early are animals, drunks, and those who prepare meals for the dying. You avoid the baker. He's still mad about the parsley incident. Instead, You go to the widow near the bridge. She's old, nearly blind, and sometimes trades food for stories. You knock. She opens her door, squinting like the sunlight is trying to trick her. It's me, you say. I know the smell, she replies. You take that as permission. Inside, it smells like boiled herbs and cat. You sit, offer her a cracked mug of weak cider from your coat. She sips it like it's wine. What is it today? She asks. Two, she nods. No questions, no judgment, just silence. And then, you want eggs? I want the memory of eggs, you joke weakly. She shuffles over, returns with a basket. Inside, 4 eggs, a knob of butter, and, miracle of miracles, a bruised pear. You stare. She shrugs. The orchard's cursed anyway. You trade her half a sack of grain and a story about the time a chicken wandered into the scaffold mid-execution and wouldn't leave. She laughs so hard she nearly chokes on the cider. You leave with the basket and the sound of her wheezing behind you. It's the closest thing to a blessing you'll get. Back in the kitchen, you place your bounty on the table like holy relics. You get to work. Eggs will be soft-boiled, buttered bread, toasted just right. You soak the crusts in broth. Fry them till crisp. Poor man's croutons. You core the pear, slice it delicately, arrange it like petals. You even sprinkle some dried mint on top. You're not sure it pairs, but it looks beautiful. That counts. The meat, though, that's tricky. You have none. You consider using the last of the cured mystery slab, but something about that feels wrong. You check the hooks by the window. A miracle. A pigeon, plump and oblivious, trapped itself in your net last night. You pluck it, clean it, roast it with thyme and garlic. Historians still argue whether final meals were a formal rite or an informal mercy. But here today it's both. And you, their cook, become their final kindness. You set the 2 trays. Then you wait. You've done this before. Only a few times, but enough to know how it works. They arrive mid-morning, escorted. One young, one old. Both pale, both barefoot. You don't speak to them. You serve them. The guards look away. This is not their ritual. You place the plates down. One nods, the other stares. You stand in the corner, hands folded, watching them eat. The young one eats slowly. He tries to chew every bite like it's his last, because it is. The older one finishes faster, says, tastes better than mercy. You're not sure what that means. You're not sure you want to know. The guards come in, the plates are removed, the condemned are let out. You don't follow. You just sit. Your legs shake. Later, the hangman returns. He says nothing, just places 2 coins on the table. He doesn't tip often. You don't know if this is generosity or guilt. He sits, eats leftover stew without complaint, then rises, leaves. You stare at the coins. They glint like lies. You place them in a jar on the mantel. You do not want to spend them. That night, you clean the plates 3 times. Then you burn the pear cores in the fire. The wall stays quiet, but you dream of pigeons. The boots are waiting. They always are. Stiff leather, caked with things you try not to name, arranged beside the hearth like sleeping beasts. He leaves them there every evening like a silent offering. And you, in your infinite grace, are supposed to scrub the sins off. You grab the vinegar, the old rag, and the brush, with half its bristles missing. The stench is immediate, a sour mix of sweat, blood, and something vaguely metallic. You hold your breath and begin. Scrub, dip, scrub again. You've cleaned these boots more times than you've peeled onions. You know every crease, every scuff, every stitched patch along the side from where he once kicked a runaway in the jaw. He told you that story over boiled cabbage like it was a dinner anecdote. The muck doesn't come off easily. It's stubborn, like guilt. You glance at the window. The sun's low, curling itself around the gallows outside like a cat finding a nap spot. The rope hangs limp, swaying gently in the wind. Even at rest, it looks smug. The brush catches on a clump. You don't look. You just scrub harder. You once had dreams. You remember that, vaguely. A kitchen in Paris, a warm tavern full of drunkards too happy to judge your broth, a little dog who stole sausages and barked at shadows. But now your dreams mostly involve vinegar and hushed screams. Historians still argue whether executioners were feared because of superstition or because of familiarity. But you know the truth. It's both. People fear what they know too well, and they know the hangman eats your soup. You set one boot aside, reach for the other. It's worse. The heel's sticky, the toe is blackened. You pour extra vinegar. It hisses as it hits whatever's dried there. You whisper an apology to no one in particular. He's upstairs, probably asleep, or reading that tattered book of Psalms he keeps hidden in the drawer, as if divine words cancel out earthly deeds. Once you asked him if he believed. He said, only in silence. You polish the final boot to a dull shine. It won't gleam, not anymore. Nothing in this house does. You rinse your hands. The water turns pink, then cloudy. You dump it outside, past the kitchen step, where nothing grows. The ground there is gray. Always. You return to the kitchen. Wipe down the counter. Restack the firewood. Check the pantry again, even though you already know what's in it. Sadness, stale flour, and the haunting aroma of missed opportunities. There's a sound at the door, not a knock, a scrape. You freeze. You open it slowly. Nothing, except a small sack. Inside, carrots, fresh, and a small wrapped bundle. Cheese, soft and new. No note, no coin. You close the door, lock it. You stare at the sack. A gift? A bribe? A warning? You don't know, but you accept it. You set the cheese carefully in a crock. The carrots, you peel and dice for tomorrow. You allow yourself a sliver of the cheese. It's creamy, salty. Your tongue sighs. You sit by the hearth, boots now clean, stew simmering for tomorrow, and hold your hands out to the fire. The wall behind you groans. The kitchen cools just a touch. You hum. That same old lullaby. The one your mother sang when storms rattled the roof. As you clean the brush, you wonder, not for the first time, what it would be like to scrub something that wasn't soaked in consequence. A bowl, a spoon, a life. But for now, it's boots. Always the boots. Until they're yours. There are few things more awkward than feeding someone their last meal. Not metaphorically, not philosophically, literally. You've done it 5 times now. Each one slightly different. Each one worse than the last. And each time, you swear you won't look into their eyes. And each time, you do. Today, one of them smiles. It's a boy. Maybe 20, maybe younger. It's hard to tell under the dirt and bruises. He sits at the small wooden table, hunched, shackled, and strangely cheerful. You place the bowl in front of him. Barley porridge with honey. A rare luxury. You dipped into your own stash for that honey, the one you hide in the empty flour tin, wrapped in wax and gilt. The boy looks up and says, "You eat this too?" You nod. Sometimes. He grins. Not bad for a condemned man's cook. You want to say something, anything, but you don't. You've learned the value of silence. It's your favorite spice now, right after salt. The other guest doesn't speak. An older woman, pale, her lips are dry. She looks at the food like it's a test, a trick. She pokes the bread slice, then eats it slowly, piece by piece, never taking her eyes off you. But you know, the boy says between bites, I thought it'd be worse. Figured I'd be eating rats. You nearly say, that was Tuesday, but decide against it. Historians still argue whether last meals were chosen by the condemned or dictated by convenience. You know the answer. It's whatever you can make with what's left and what hasn't gone sour. You poured vinegar on the lentils, added thyme from the window box. Bread was softened in broth until it wept. This is the best meal you've made all month, and it will be their last. The boy finishes, licks the spoon. Thank you. You nod, but your throat tightens. No one thanks you in this house. The woman says nothing, but she sets her spoon down neatly. That's all. Guards come. You step back. They shuffle out, and then it's just you. The empty bowls, the two chairs, one still warm. You gather the dishes and wash them carefully, like they matter more now. Later, the hangman comes in. He doesn't ask what you made. He never does. He just eats the leftover porridge and nods once. Approval. Or maybe indigestion. Then he stands and says, they both prayed. You blink. Together? He shrugs. Didn't stop them from dying. You don't reply. He leaves. You stay. You always stay. You wipe down the table. The spoon the boy used, you almost put it aside. Not for sentiment, just habit. But no, you scrub it like the rest. You open the window, let the breeze in. It carries dust, the faint smell of rain, and the sounds of townsfolk walking home from market, full of chatter and bread they didn't have to beg for. You wonder if they know what just happened here. Probably not. They think you're strange, cursed, dirty by association. They avoid your shadow in the street. They don't take your coins. They whisper when you pass. But today someone smiled at your stew and said thank you. That'll have to be enough. You sit by the hearth and eat the crusts left behind. Cold, soft, silent. You hear them before you see them. The townsfolk, that is. They don't knock on your door. That would imply civility. They gather outside in little clumps, peeking around corners, huddled near the fence line, pretending they're just passing by. But they're not. They're there to gossip. About him, about you. You catch snatches of it through the cracked shutters as you scrub the counter. Swears she saw the hangman buying leeks. Ew, his cook? She boils frogs. No seasoning. Food smells like death and boiled shame. You could go outside and shout something witty, something bold. But you don't. Because what's the point? They already decided who you are, and no amount of fresh herbs will uncook that narrative. You just keep scrubbing. The kitchen reeks of broth and wood smoke, and the corner where you hang, your garlic is drooping like it's given up. You straighten it, not because it helps, but because it makes you feel like something listens to you in this house. You stir the soup pot. Thin today. You stretch the bones from yesterday's pigeon and added barley and some wild sorrel you picked from behind the gallows. Gallows greens, you call them. The hangman doesn't mind. He never asks what's in the soup, only that it's hot and not burnt, and served at noon, sharp. You glance at the clock. It's almost time. You hear laughter outside, not joyful laughter, not the kind you'd serve warm pastries to. It's the sharp-edged laughter of people who don't know you, but know of you, and hate what you remind them of. Death, punishment, their own fragility. Historians still argue whether executioners were seen as essential or abominable. You're not a historian, but you've scraped abominable off the bottom of your own shoes. He enters, as he always does, quiet, solid, smelling faintly of rope oil and something that might be remorse. You place the bowl in front of him. He takes one bite and says, "Needs garlic." You want to tell him the garlic's wilting under the weight of public opinion, but you just nod and fetch a clove. Press it with the flat of your knife. Toss it into the pot. He eats. You eat too, more slowly. A crust. A bit of soup. From outside, a stone clinks against the shutter. You flinch. He doesn't. You both keep eating. You hear them, you ask. Always, he replies, mouth full. Do you care? He chews, swallows, wipes his mouth with the back of his hand. No. You believe him? Mostly. The bowl is empty too soon. He stands, leaves. You sit longer, listening to the voices fade, moving on to the next scandal, the next sin. You clean the bowls and stack them by the fire. The dish towel smells of vinegar and smoke. Everything does. You open the window just a crack. Let some fresh air in. It carries the scent of wet stone, horse manure, and somewhere, miraculously, fresh bread. You close your eyes. Try to remember what a bakery smells like from the inside. It's harder than it should be. You glance at the garlic again. It hangs limply like a hanged man. You almost laugh. Almost. Instead, you hang more garlic beside it and whisper to it, I'm not afraid of them, even if you are, especially if you are. Dinner is the hardest meal, not because it's complex. On most days, it's stew or porridge or mystery brown. No, it's hard because of what happens outside the kitchen window right before it. The executions usually happen in the late afternoon, just in time for folks to finish their work, grab a crust of bread, and stroll down to the square for a bit of state-sanctioned entertainment. Family friendly, if your family has a particularly bleak sense of humor. And you? You dice onions to the rhythm of falling blades. You know the cadence now. The way the crowd swells with anticipation, the pause, the drop, the exhale. Then someone screams. Not always the condemned. Often it's someone in the crowd who thought they could stomach it. Spoiler alert, they couldn't. The kitchen window doesn't face the scaffold, but the sound wraps around like wind. You hear it all. And worse, you feel it. Like the house exhales with the crowd. Like the chopping block has its own echo in the floorboards. You dice faster. The onions are old, soft in places. You ignore the brown patches. You can't afford to care. The hangman wants dinner when he gets home. Always. It's not a request. Tonight you're making pottage. Barley, onion, salt, a handful of dried herbs that once claimed to be thyme. You stir it with one hand while scraping burnt bits from the side of the pot with the other. You add broth from the bones you boiled this morning. You think they were chicken, maybe duck. Hopefully not. Anything else. The pot bubbles as the crowd outside murmurs, disperses. You hear a child laughing, which somehow feels worse than the scream. You taste the pottage. It's bland. You add salt. Always salt. Historians still argue whether salt was more valuable than gold in 17th century France. In your kitchen, it definitely is. Salt covers many sins, including your own. You ladle the pottage into a bowl just as the door creaks open. He enters, slower than usual. His shoulders are heavy today, like the axe was heavier than normal. He doesn't speak, just sits. The smell of sweat, iron, and wood smoke trails behind him. You place the bowl in front of him. He stares at it for a moment, like he's not sure if it's food or a memory. Then he eats. You sit across from him, chewing your own portion in small, careful bites. He eats like a man who's spent too much time around silence. Halfway through, he finally says, Small one today. You nod. Loud? Too loud. You both go quiet. Then he says, Didn't flinch. You don't ask who he means. You just sip your broth. He pushes his bowl aside. Too much onion. You smile. Just a twitch. I'll tell the onions to behave. That gets the closest thing to a laugh you've heard from him in months. A grunt, maybe. A wheeze of air shaped like amusement. Then, without warning, he says, "You ever think about what happens after?" You blink. After what? The rope, the blade, after. You set your spoon down. Sometimes he nods, as if that's enough, then stands, takes the bowl to the counter. Not normal. He usually just leaves it. You wash the bowl while he lingers by the fire. He speaks again. They say you're cursed. You nod. Probably. They say I am too. Definitely. He almost smiles. Maybe we cancel each other out. You look at him. For a moment he seems tired. Not physically. Tired in the soul. He turns to go. Pauses at the door. Good onions, though. Then he leaves. You stare at the door. And then, because there's nothing else to do, you add more water to the pot and start preparing for tomorrow. The chopping block outside has gone quiet, but inside, you're still dicing. The children arrive before sunrise. Not your children, his. 3 of them. The youngest still can't pronounce executioner without adding an extra sh sound, which somehow makes it worse. They come once a week, maybe twice, sometimes with their mother, sometimes without. Today, they tumble into the kitchen like they've been chasing ghosts through the alley. You're elbow deep in dough when the door bursts open. The boy, maybe 7, announces, "Papa said we get soup." Of course he did. You dust your hands and nod like this is normal. Like you weren't just talking to the flower about existential dread. They sit around the splintered table like little judges, eyeing your every move. One of the girls taps her fingers in rhythm on the table's edge. Another begins humming something vaguely funereal. They have his eyes. Dark. Flat. Watching. You ladle out the morning broth. It's thin. Carrot mostly. A few sad scraps of salted pork from 2 days ago. You add crusts to make it feel more like food. They don't complain. They never do. They just eat. And honestly, that's the unsettling part. The boy slurps loudly. You make this with pig or person. You almost drop the ladle. He laughs. The others laugh too. You smile weakly. Pig, I think. They love that answer. Historians still argue whether executioners' families were treated like pariahs or simply tolerated with great discomfort. From where you're standing, it's more the latter, with a generous helping of superstition and avoidance. The children seem immune. They know who their father is, what he does. They play games in the dirt with pretend nooses. You once saw the middle girl tying knots with such speed, it gave you a full body shiver. They finish their soup. The boy wipes his mouth with his sleeve. Can I see the heads? No, you say, too fast. He shrugs. Papa lets us sometimes. You stare at him. I said no. He frowns, as if you've just denied him dessert, then gets up and wanders toward the hearth. The others follow. You clean the bowls, hands shaky, eyes flicking to the door. They won't go far, they never do, but still, you follow. The 3 of them are crouched by the fire, whispering in a strange circle. One holds a stick, tracing symbols into the ash. You cough gently. Shoo, go find your father. They scatter with giggles, boots thumping over the worn floorboards. The door slams behind them. You sit. You feel suddenly very tired. The bowl of garlic sways slightly from its hook. You steady it. The kitchen is quiet again, but not peaceful. Later, the hangman enters. He doesn't say much. He rarely does, but he notices the crumbs and the extra bowls drying by the fire. They eat? He asks. You nod. Like wolves, he grunts. Better than not eating. He places a wrapped bundle on the table. For you. You open it. Bread. Real bread. Dense. Fresh. You blink. He's already halfway out the door. Thanks, you mutter. He waves a hand. You eat a slice by the fire, still warm, and for a fleeting moment, you forget what house you live in. At first, you don't notice the priest standing outside the gate. He's small, hooded, holding a book with more gold leaf than humility. You think he's lost until you realize he's staring at the door. Your door. You wipe your hands on your apron and step outside. He doesn't speak. Not at first, just eyes you like he's deciding whether to exercise or bless. Father, you say carefully. He finally speaks. I've come about the soup. You blink. Excuse me? For the dead, he clarifies. The widow who passed last week. Her daughter says you cooked for her. Before the rope. Ah, that soup. Lentil, onion, a splash of vinegar. The daughter insisted on feeding her one last hot meal. She said it tasted comforting. The priest says, like it's a diagnosis. I want the recipe. You almost laugh. Almost. Instead, you say, you want me to give you the recipe for comfort? He doesn't flinch. For mercy. Ah, of course. You nod. It's mostly about what you leave out. Historians still argue whether food prepared for the dying had symbolic meaning in early modern France, or whether it was merely an act of necessity. For you, it's always both. But the symbolism is baked in now, soaked into broth, folded into bread, salted into your very fingertips. The priest clears his throat. May I come in? You hesitate, then step aside. He enters the kitchen slowly, like the walls might crumble from holiness. His eyes skim the garlic braids, the blackened hearth, the stew pot steaming gently in the corner. You gesture to the pot. Would you like some? He sits, nods. Please. You ladle it out. Modest. He's used to indulgence, so a humble bowl of barley and leek might surprise him. He sips, then sips again. Finally, it's plain. Plain is honest, you reply. He sets the spoon down. Do you believe in God? You shrug. I believe in hot soup, and that onions, when chopped, are a form of penance. He almost smiles. Then he says, this kitchen, has it been blessed? You stiffen. I don't think it's stuck. He stands suddenly, touches the doorframe. I could fix that. No, thank you. He pauses. Why not? Because what's done here, you say quietly, needs remembering, not washing away. He studies you, then nods. He leaves without another word. You watch from the doorway as he disappears down the lane. Later, you light a candle by the hearth, not for anyone specific, just because. You chop onions slowly, letting the sting rise and settle. The air fills with that familiar sharpness, part memory, part apology. You hear the hangman's boots outside. He's early. You wipe your hands and reach for the ladle. Tonight's dinner? Leek and barley, with a hint of garlic, for honesty. The market refuses you again, not loudly, not with pitchforks or curses, just quietly, like a wall that breathes and never speaks. You approach a cart, and the vendor suddenly finds something terribly interesting in his sack of flour. A butcher claims he's just closed, though he hasn't moved in an hour. The fishmonger sees you and turns the other way, still holding the eel he was halfway through gutting. You keep walking. Your basket swings emptily at your side. Not even a pity turnip today. Eventually, you reach the alley near the tannery. It smells like old leather, wet bark, and forgotten apologies. There's a woman there. Sells pickled cabbage out of a jar so old it may predate sin. You've bought from her before. She doesn't like you, but she hates wasted food more. I need something, you say. She eyes you. Again? You nod. It's for him. She clicks her tongue, then disappears behind a curtain. returns with a waxy cloth bundle. Inside, cabbage, a small onion, salt still clumped from last year's rain. You hold out 2 coins. She shakes her head. Just take it. You hesitate. Why? She looks at you, really looks at you, then says, "You feed the one who doesn't flinch. That makes you the one who bears it." You take the bundle and leave before she changes her mind. Back in your kitchen, you unwrap it gently, like it's treasure, which, in its own pale way, it is. You chop the cabbage finely, slice the onion thin. The salt goes into the pot like an offering. You boil it all until the smell almost resembles comfort. Almost. Historians still argue whether the cast of dishonored professions, executioners, gravediggers, and yes, their cooks, had any recourse in society, whether redemption was ever an option. But redemption doesn't show up in your pantry, only expired salt. You sit by the hearth, sipping weak tea while the soup simmers. A knock at the door. You brace. It's a boy. Not the usual one. This one's younger, eyes wide. He holds out a basket. Inside, miraculously, 4 eggs and a hunk of soft cheese. "From the miller's wife," he says, then runs. You close the door, set the basket down. Soft cheese, rich, creamy, almost absurd in its generosity. You cut a sliver. It melts on your tongue like a memory of a life you never had. You consider writing a note, a thank you, but you don't know how to sign it. What are you, after all? A cook? A shadow? A walking reminder that someone has to feed the hand that swings the sword? The soup finishes. You taste it. It's sour, but warm. You ladle it into a bowl, set it on the table. He enters soon after, says nothing, eats slowly. Halfway through, he asks, "Where'd you get the cabbage?" You shrug. "Forgiveness jar." He grunts. "Tastes better than regret." You think, "So does cheese." But you just nod and keep sipping your tea. When he finishes, he pushes the bowl away and says, "It's good." You look up surprised. He adds, "Even if it's cursed." You smile. "It is. Everything here is, but you still serve it hot." The cellar floods again. Not dramatically. Not with rushing torrents and panicked shouts. Just enough to be annoying. Just enough that the potato sack now has the consistency of wet bread, and the firewood smells like a dog that's lost its will to live. You step down into the shallow puddle, water soaking into your boots instantly. Cold, of course, always cold. You grope around for what might be salvageable. A few apples, soft, but still vaguely apple-shaped. A bag of barley, miraculously dry, thanks to its perch atop the wine crate that hasn't contained wine in 3 years. You haul your spoils upstairs, dripping with effort and faint in dignity. Back in the kitchen, the apples go into the pot with a splash of cider vinegar and a pinch of dried rosemary. You're not aiming for delicious. You're aiming for not tragic. You add barley, some stale breadcrumbs, and the last of the cheese rind you've been saving like it's a family heirloom. The pot sighs, so do you. Then you hear the wall. Not words, not even a knock. Just pressure. A sort of shifting, like someone leaned against it on the other side. You freeze. But the sensation fades. You stir the pot. The smell begins to rise. Sweet, sour, warm. Like comfort food made by someone who's forgotten what comfort feels like. Historians still argue whether medieval kitchens were designed with acoustics in mind. Whispers, sounds from the adjoining walls, the eerie carrying of voices through thin timber. You can confirm, yes. Every whisper lives longer than it should in these walls. You plate a portion for yourself. Not him. He's gone today, off to a village down the river. 2 executions, some bureaucrat who stole grain, and a widow who stabbed her 4th husband. You get the night off. which means you get to eat sitting down, feet up, in front of the hearth. You even use the good spoon, the one without splinters. The barley apple mix isn't bad, a bit too tart, but you chew slowly, gratefully. You take a second helping, then a third. The silence grows cozy. You almost fall asleep there, blanket wrapped around your shoulders, spoon dangling from your fingers like a tiny wooden lullaby. Then you hear something, a whisper from the pantry. You sit up, listen, nothing. You cross the kitchen, open the pantry door slowly. Still nothing, just your shelf of jars, your limp onion braid, your one remaining potato, which is starting to sprout opinions. You close the door, turn around, and see the bundle on the table. It wasn't there before, wrapped in cloth, tied with string. You approach slow, untie it. Inside, a loaf of fresh bread, still warm, no note, just bread. You sit down, tear off a piece. It's soft, springy, smells like everything your house isn't. You take a bite. It's good. Too good. You start to cry. Not loudly, not theatrically, just quiet, persistent tears sliding down your cheeks, while your teeth work through a bite of something that doesn't taste like fear. You eat the whole piece, then you wrap the rest up carefully, reverently, and place it in the bread tin. Tomorrow, you'll ask no questions, but you'll leave the door slightly open, just in case kindness wants to visit again. You're halfway through shelling peas when the knock comes. Not the usual knock, not a shuffle from a barefoot child with a borrowed basket. This one is sharp, official, the kind of knock that smells like ink and tax records. You wipe your hands on your apron and open the door. A man stands there in a coat so stiff it could probably stand on its own. He has a wax-sealed envelope in one hand and a ledger in the other. His hair is slicked flat, like he's afraid of static electricity, and his boots are polished to a level that would offend the mud outside your gate if mud had feelings. "You're the cook," he says. Not a question. You nod. He hands you the envelope. From the magistrate. "You're being requisitioned." You blink. "Requisitioned?" "For the execution banquet." You blink again. "The what?" He sighs, already bored. "Annual civic ceremony. Honoring justice. You'll prepare the feast. For the magistrate, clergy, constables, and assorted legal parasites." He doesn't say that last part aloud, but you hear it anyway. You open the envelope. Inside, a list. 2 pages. Ingredients, guest count, wine pairings. One note reads, "Must include swan or similar majestic bird." You don't even know where to find a majestic bird. You close the door gently and lean against it. The hangman finds you like that, 10 minutes later, still holding the letter like it might explode. He reads it over your shoulder. Grunts. "They want roasted justice with a side of denial." You snort. "You know where I can find a swan?" He shrugs. "Get creative." And so you do. You barter, beg, bluff. You trade an entire sack of barley for a goose fattened to the size of a small cow. You borrow spices from the widow down the lane. She hands them over wordlessly, with a look that says, "I better get leftovers or your teeth." You stay up all night. You stuff the goose with onions, dried fruit, and despair. You glaze it with vinegar, honey, and whatever mysterious brown syrup the priest once gifted for blessings. You make root, vegetable cakes, breads with herbs, cabbage so sweet it makes you emotional. You cook like your name might finally mean something other than "that poor woman who feeds death." Historians still argue whether these civic feasts were meant to legitimize executions or simply distract from them. Either way, the goose doesn't care, and neither do you, because for once, You're cooking for people who haven't already been judged. The kitchen fills with smells you forgot existed: cinnamon, sage, citrus peel. You hum. You smile even. You wipe your face with your sleeve and realize you've been crying into the glaze. The banquet is held in the town hall. They don't let you through the front door. You enter through the side like smoke. You serve the food yourself, hands trembling, feet aching, sleeves still damp from stew splatter. They eat. And oh, they praise. Exquisite, says the priest. Unreal, says the magistrate. Didn't think Goose could do that, says one constable with crumbs in his beard. No one asks your name. No one thanks you. At the end, the steward hands you a silver coin. One. You return home that night, bone weary. The kitchen is cold. The fire's gone out. You place the coin on the table. It rolls, stops, then tips over, just like your hope. You curl up by the hearth with a crust and a bowl of leftover carrot or mash. It's not majestic, but it's yours. The meat smells like sin. You didn't buy it, didn't trade for it. It was left, wrapped in cloth, tucked neatly in the cold cellar. No note, no explanation. You knew immediately where it came from. Confiscated goods, which in this town often means someone died owning it. Sometimes the hangman brings back little gifts from the condemned. They won't be needing this, he'll say, dropping a sack of chestnuts or a bottle of brandy onto the table. He never brings money, only food, and only things that don't talk back. But this slab of meat wrapped like a gift from a butcher with no soul, you hold it at arm's length, smell it. Pork, maybe. Could be venison. Could be, nope, don't go down that road. You wash it. Twice. Then you marinate it in vinegar and garlic and a small avalanche of thyme. If guilt had a taste, it would need that much time too. You light the fire. The pan hisses. The scent rises like a sermon gone wrong. Historians still argue whether it was legal for hangmen to claim property of the executed. The law was muddy, the enforcement muddier. But here in this kitchen, legality has always come second to availability. You sear the meat, flip it. Watch the fat render down into golden confession. You make a sauce, wine, onions, herbs, and a dash of the leftover blood from the cutting board. Not yours, not anyone you know, just blood. When it's done, you plate it with potatoes, real ones, dug up from the northern slope where the frost hasn't yet set in. The hangman comes in just as you finish drizzling the sauce. He sniffs. Special occasion? You shrug. It was already paid for. He sits, eats. Midway through, he says, "This is good." Too good? He looks up. Whose was it? You don't answer. He doesn't ask again. You watch him eat the whole thing. Every bite. He even wipes the plate with a hunk of bread. Then he stands, says nothing, and leaves. You sit with the empty plate for a while. Then you take the pan and scrub it harder than necessary, as if cleanliness can erase origin. You wrap up the leftovers. You don't throw them out. You're not rich enough to be righteous. You store them behind the vinegar jug. You light a candle. It flickers strangely. You whisper to it, "Forgive me." It flares once, then settles. The house creaks. Outside, an owl hoots. Or maybe something else. Something watching. You sit by the hearth with a bowl of cold wine and think about how far ingredients can travel between crime and consumption. Tonight, you don't dream. Or if you do, you don't wake up remembering. You run out of salt. Not metaphorically. Not in some grand poetic way. Literally. The barrel scrapes dry, the last few grains clinging to the wood like regrets. And just like that, your kitchen becomes a place of bland sorrow. No salt means no preservation. No salt means limp cabbage, weeping meat, and flavorless stew that tastes like warm water and broken promises. You sit on the floor and stare at the empty barrel for a while. You've known drought, famine, even plague, but no salt? That's personal. The hangman notices immediately. He takes one bite of the evening broth and says, "It tastes like nothing." You nod. It's honest. He pushes the bowl away. You save it anyway. Tomorrow you'll repurpose it into a gravy or a punishment. You write a note to yourself. Steal salt. Then you cross it out. Then write borrow. Then barter. Historians still argue whether salt shortages were signs of economic collapse or simply poor planning. You argue that salt is the one ingredient nobody respects until it's gone. You tie your cloak and head into town. The salt merchant won't look at you. Sold out, he lies, eyes darting to the bag in plain view behind him. You try the baker. He snorts. Used mine on the pretzels. The fishwife just laughs. You consider crying, but instead you walk toward the chapel. The priest is outside, sweeping imaginary leaves. He looks up. Cook. You nod. I need salt. He studies you like a theologian considering a heresy, then gestures you inside. You follow him into the cellar. It smells like damp pages and unspoken things. He pulls a small sack from a shelf and hands it to you. You'll owe me, he says. You already do. Back home, you open the sack. Salt. Real. Coarse. Like tiny crystals of redemption. You hold it in your hands and feel powerful. You remake the stew. This time it sings. Carrots, turnips, a bit of barley, and just enough salt to bring them to life. You garnish with a scrap of cheese and a dash of pride. He eats in silence. Midway through, he says, "It's back." You smile. What is? The thing that makes me eat slower. You take it as a compliment. After he leaves, you sit by the fire and pour a small pile of salt onto a plate. You trace shapes in it with your finger. Spirals, stars, a crude drawing of a goose. Then, without thinking, you whisper, "Thank you." You're not sure who it's for. Maybe the priest, maybe the wind, maybe just the salt itself. In this house, even gratitude is best served quietly. You dream of linens. Not riches, not freedom. Just clean, crisp white linens that don't smell like broth or ash. A tablecloth that doesn't have a scorch mark. A napkin folded neatly instead of tucked into a cracked bowl. In this dream, your apron isn't stiff with old flour and despair. It's soft. Cotton. New. You wake up in the same apron as always. Stiff. Stained. Threadbare around the waist ties. The fire is out. Your joints protest. Your dreams dissolve faster than the morning chill. You begin your daily inventory. 2 onions, half a head of cabbage, a heel of bread too stale for chewing, but good for thickening soup, a strip of meat you think is lamb, but has a faint, fishy scent you'd rather not investigate. You turn it into hash, fried with onions, pressed flat in the pan. You pretend it's from a Paris bistro and not a condemned man's knapsack. The hangman doesn't speak when he eats it, just chews with methodical focus, like he's solving a crime in his mouth. You ever think about doing something else? You ask suddenly. He looks up. Like what? Making cheese, opening a little tavern, selling pancakes? He chews, swallows. Would people eat there, knowing who made them? You don't answer. Historians still argue whether executioners ever escaped their trade or whether the name followed their bloodline like a bad smell. You already know the answer. His children tie nooses in the yard. Your name is whispered behind shutters. You're as stained as your apron. That afternoon, you scrub the floors harder than usual. It doesn't help. The black patch by the hearth won't come out. You tell yourself it's spilled cider, not spilled blood. You take the cloth outside. Hang it over the fence. Watch the wind toy with it. A girl passes by, stops. She stares at you, Not with fear, with curiosity. Are you the one who makes the soup? She asks. You nod. My papa says it smells like sadness. You smile faintly. He's not wrong. She frowns. I like it. Then she runs off. You stare at the cloth flapping in the breeze, still stained. But for a second, it looks like it's dancing. That night, the hangman leaves early. You sit by the fire with a bowl of lentils and close your eyes. In your mind, you set a table with fresh linens. You serve yourself something warm, something kind, and no one asks who you cooked it for. The rain doesn't knock. It barges in sideways. It hammers the shutters, slaps the roof, leaks through the crack above the hearth where the plaster gave up 2 summers ago. You set out the usual pot to catch the drip and keep stirring. The soup is thin, turnip, cabbage, and a bone so clean it's practically a philosopher. You're tired. Not I need sleep tired. The other kind. The kind that sits in your bones like spoiled marrow. The kind that makes your hands feel too big, too slow. You move through the kitchen like you're underwater. Except the water is made of days that smell like smoke and wet wool. He hasn't come down yet. You hope he's gone. You hope he's asleep. You hope he's been called away to supervise a drowning somewhere. Anything that gives you a few hours of silence and soup that doesn't have to impress. You sit at the table, the good chair, the one that doesn't wobble unless it feels like it. You eat straight from the pot. You don't even use a bowl. Halfway through, the door opens. You don't look. He sits, doesn't speak. You keep eating. Finally, he says, You didn't set a place for me. You chew. You're not a guest, you reply. He grunts, then adds, They're hanging the scribe tomorrow. You pause. The one who taught the children to write? He nods. Why? Wrong pamphlet, right crowd. You finish your mouthful. Do you want a plate? He shakes his head. You slide the pot over. He takes your spoon. You don't mind. For a few minutes, you share the pot in silence. Not peace, just absence of conflict, which is the closest thing this house gets to affection. I saw a dog today, he says. Did it survive the conversation? It ran. Smart. You both smile. Barely. He finishes, wipes his mouth with his sleeve, stands. At the door, he pauses. You think I'm evil? You look at him. Really look. I think you're hungry. He nods, then leaves. The door clicks shut. You sit alone with the empty pot, the rain, and the feeling that maybe, just maybe, you've fed more than one kind of hunger in this house. You clean up. You dry the chair. You blow out the candle. And you go to bed. The rain still dances on the roof. But it's softer now, like it's remembering how to whisper. So now, the kitchen grows quiet. The fire has faded to the gentlest glow. Like the last breath of a dream you don't need to chase. The walls, once full of creaks and mutters and imagined footsteps, seem to settle in too, content to rest for just this one evening without demanding more. The spoons have been washed. The boots are dry. Even the garlic braid, slumped and tired, hangs still in the corner. Outside, the rain slips off the eaves like a lullaby, slow and steady. The gallows stands silent for once. No crowd, no verdict, just wood in the dark. You might almost forget what they're for. The floor beneath your feet is cool, and your body, finally, lets out a long, invisible sigh. Not from fear, not from sorrow, just from being. Maybe the soup tomorrow will be better. Maybe not. Maybe someone will knock again. Maybe no one will. But for now, this little corner of the world, with its cracked bowls and strange silences, holds still. And in that stillness, there's space to breathe. You lean back in your chair, let your eyes soften. The candle flickers once, then settles. The storm outside hums, but here, the only sound left is the echo of your own heartbeat slowing down. You're not cursed. You're just tired. And you've done enough for today. Sleep well. End of script. Sweet dreams.